Hello, my name is Tuthlin Penry. I'm a solitary pagan witch and the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. Now, this little talk was prompted by a viewer's query. Some years back, I wrote a book called Magic on the Breath, and it was actually the reason I set up the Wolf and Howl Press, because I wanted to publish it and because I felt it had a message that needed to get out there. My other books were published by other people, but this is what started me setting up the press. What I was asked was, how do you actually use magic on the breath if you're doing something like selling a house? Do you concentrate on removing all obstacles to the sale, or do you concentrate on attracting a buyer? Now, it sounds very mundane, but let's be honest here. Most people use magic for very practical, very mundane purposes. And this idea that somehow you must never use magic for personal gain is something very, very recent. And I was brought up in a family of witches, and I can tell you now that not one of them would have recognised that sentiment. And if you look at old books of spells and charms, you will find that they were often concerned with personal gain. In fact, it's a very difficult thing to define anyway. So let's get that out of the way. And that strange buzzing noise, we haven't got a bee in the kitchen. I thought we had earlier, but that's my fridge going off now. I don't know, I must have left the door open too long or something. Anyway, so let's get back to this. How do we use magic on the breath? The idea that we're going to use things on the out breath. You can use the in breath, it's slightly different. And do we get rid of obstacles first, or do we attract a purchaser? Well, I would say, as above, so below, which is a quotation that comes from a very well-known text called the Emerald Tablet of Her Mistress Megistus. As above, so below. Basically means that things you want to do, magically speaking, should reflect the real world, if you like. So, let's have a look at this. If you know that you have problems in the offing, if you like, with a sale. If you know, for example, that your next door neighbour is planning to build a helicopter landing pad within the next 6 months, well, then you have an obstacle. And it may well be that that would be the best thing to deal with first, to try and dispel the obstacle, to either make it that they don't get planning permission, or to make it that whoever is interested and buys your house is a helicopter enthusiast, let's say. Two ways of looking at it. If you're not getting much interest in your house, well, then you might want to try attracting viewers first, because if people don't come and view your house, you're not going to get a buyer. Very rare indeed that people buy houses unseen. Magic is all about training your mind. Now, I did an earlier little talk, one of these videos called, I think it was Intention and Will in Magic. And that's very important too. But the whole thing is that you have to focus. And the problem we often get is that instead of focusing, we're partly thinking of what we want to happen and the things we don't want to happen. And you cannot combine the two in a spell. If you want to get rid of obstacles, you do that as a spell. And if you want to attract buyers, you do that for your spell. Do not try and get rid of obstacles at the same time in the same spell as you're attracting buyers, because the chances are what you will do is get rid of a potential purchaser. Now, this sounds terribly mundane, I know, and I know there are people going to be listening to this who would much prefer I talked about loftier things like world peace, but let's face it, we're only human. There may be all sorts of good reasons why we want to get certain things to happen in our lives, and why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we? We're not trying to harm people, we're trying to get things that we want and need, as long as they don't dominate our lives. This is another part of the problem. So, when you're doing any kind of spell, concentrate first on the things you don't want to happen. Get them sorted. Concentrate then on the things you do want to happen. Get them sorted. Keep them perfectly separate. I mean, if you're not terribly comfortable doing spells, I would even say don't do them on the same day. Give a couple of days between them to get yourself time to work up to the one and then time to work up to the other. This is how these things work. They don't work if you try and put them all into a bowl and blend them together. No. So, when we talk about magic on the breath, the idea is that you do your magic on the out breath. That's where the will and the intention go. That's where the focus is. So you want to get rid of the whatever next door. So you take a deep breath, you think about what you want to get rid of, and you literally blow it away. If you want to attract things, there's another method you can use, which does work well. You can do the same thing. I mean, you can blow it away, but think of drawing it towards you. But that's more difficult. So what I would suggest is this. Do a very gentle out breath, whatever, and then think hard about the things you want to attract. And what I do is I tend to bring my hand towards me, like that, as you start to think of it. And you literally... you draw in, always in through the nose, out through the mouth. Works better that way. And the other thing I sometimes find is very, very useful to try and steady yourself, and that's to make a tapping sound that echoes your heartbeat. So you get yourself breathing in like this, like that. My favourite way of doing it was with a staff. But you can, hear I'm knocking on the table, da-da, 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 like that, so that it's... how many times you feel comfortable with. For heaven's sake, don't go blue in the face. And I hope that's helped a little bit. I always like to hear from viewers, and if you have any suggestions for things you'd like me to talk about, please get in touch. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. Goodbye.